afternoon. Another episode of LIGHTBOB TV. This is episode 2 on Monday Source. And today we're going to talk about two things: direct versus general diffuse lights. And before I start, I just want to talk about before we choose a fixture, we must understand what or how light behave. So if we understand that, then we can decide and we can start to have a lighting program that is more coherent. Most lighting conversation begins with what fixture, uh, what kind of material, what kind of brand we want. But we should definitely start the conversation with what type of source. Um, my past mentor, Abe Fader, that was the first thing he was asking: what's the bulb? And these days we used to talk about bulbs because you had two different types of bulbs. You had directional and you had general diffuse. And from there, you would know exactly, where to go and what to do. And this is what we're going to talk today. Um, this weekend, I was thinking, like, what's the best way to start this show, and what would be my message that would be life changing. And if the only thing you get after this show is the difference between direct light and general diffuse, then my job is done. But there's so much more to talk about. But today, I just want to focus on the principle and understand these two different behavior, uh, and which you can describe any scene with these words: directional and general diffuse. And we'll go through that. So what's our main, what are we trying to solve? uh, what's the structural problem that we're trying to solve when we have a lighting challenge? um, and most projects confuse a lot of things. They confuse brightness, they confuse fixture style, they confuse wattage, they confuse lumen output, and all of those things are very, very important and necessary, uh, but they don't define the behavior of the light at first. Does it make sense? So yes, wattage is very important. Lumen output is very important. The type of fixtures. But what we want to know is that when we enter into this space, what's the lighting feeling we're going to have? And we'll go through that. And again, that's a project that is driven by hardware, uh, will never will never have any identity. Why? Because hardware is very limited. But if you can start talk about lighting behavior, then you have an infinite possibility of talking, and most of all, being understood. Because that's the most important thing, is when you have a dialogue with light and when you start talking about lighting, what's important is not how smart you are, is how your client or the audience understand what's going to happen in that space when you turn the switch on. And this has been my, I could say this has been my the main concern I had all my life. Because and thanks to Abe, um, because Abe was very, very, um, he didn't make any compromise. And let me tell you a little story. One time, and these days I had, we didn't have cell phone. I had a beeper, and I got a beep from Laverne, and So I call her back and she says, well, Mr. Fader wants you to meet him at the Rockefeller Center lobby. And I was pretty new in New York. So I said, okay. So I took the train, get out, walk, get into the Rockefeller Center. And then it's like Grand Central. There's people everywhere, elevator. And I asked her, I said, how am I going to find him? She said, you'll find him. Don't worry. When you get there, you'll find him. So I'm walking through the lobby, and there's a little rope and two chairs. And here is Mr. Fader with a megahorn. And on the other side of the lobby, there's two guys on a scissor lift that are playing with bulbs. And what he's doing actually is that he's lighting up one of the mural, well, all the mural, but he's working on a section particularly. And he's working with these bulbs, these directional bulbs that are MR16 75 watt, that are brand new, been launched from, I think, GE or some other manufacturers. And that's what he's doing. He's testing them. So I see him go beside the rope, and I sit down, and he said, watch this. And then he said, do you see the color? I said, yes. And then he said, takes the megaphone, he said, okay, change the bulb. I'm like, what? In my head, I don't say anything. I'm just watching. So the guy goes and, open the fixture, take another bulb, put it in. And then I saw in front of my eyes how, color affected the rendering. But the funniest thing is the guy, when they send him the sample of bulb, they gave him a box of 12 or something like that. And they were about halfway through, and there was like 30 fixtures with about a dozen bulbs. But we were just at the number 4, and he was switching bulbs. Try another bulb. Try another bulb. I don't like this color. I don't like this. I like that. And then after half an hour, they were gone through the 12 bulbs. So he said, okay, that's it. We're out. Stand up, put the megaphone, and then we leave. And I'm like, but Mr. Fader, what about the electric? Oh, don't worry about them. They know what to do. I guess they've been working with him and they knew how he was. But the lesson here, and I asked him, I said, yeah, but those bulbs are still good. He said, no, those are prototype. And what they're doing is they're testing the different dichroic system inside. And my job is to make sure that the purity of the color is there. And I was like, wow. And he was 80 some years old. I mean, we're talking, not late in his career. So it was a very, very decisive moment in my life. And from that day on, anytime I would go to do a project that had some significance, I would come with the clients, and I would have different bulbs manufacturers and show them, because they didn't all have the same warm color. They didn't have the same beam spread. They didn't have all the same reflection. So what I would do is I would make a grid, and I would put different bulbs, different wattage, different beam opening, and I would show them with switches at the time, because we didn't have control system. I would show them different, spread, different beams, different color, and so forth. And then once we narrow down the manufacturer, because it would be very, very simple. They would love this warm color of Hushio. They would love the fact that the beam, for example, was not too crispy. There's just little flood. And all that was in their magic of the reflector. Philips, Osram, GE, Hushio, they all had different technology as far as their reflector. And once you were projecting, let's say we had them at 10 feet on the ground, you would see the beam circumference for a 20 degree. And I would compare a 20 degree GE with an Osram or a Philips. And then you would see the, like the fade out and so forth. So it became really, really important for me when I was working with bulbs to make sure that I compare eggs with eggs, not one type with the other one, and they were not compatible. So it became very simple. And after a while, I got used to work with a bulb manufacturers, and on every job I would spec them, and that saved my life. Then, of course, the LED came in, and that was another story. So let's go back to our topic, general lighting versus directional. And let's start with general diffuse. Um, the reason why I say this and how I simplify this language is I I promise I would show you this, but here we go. So this is my IAS handbook, and this is I don't know if you see it, but it's one of the first edition. It's not, and it's an original, and it's got all kinds of cool thing in it. And and what I did before I wrote my book is that I look at this book, and I look what was real, what was true then that is still true today. And that's what I came up with, these two sources, general diffuse and directionals. Because in those days they were talking the same language. They didn't talk about anything else but general diffuse and directional. So when we're talking about general diffuse, it very define it simply. It's a light spread widely, that has like soft shadow. And I was going to bring some light bulb sample, but I think everybody understand what a light bulb is. And when you see it, and when it diffuse lights everywhere, it's got this gentle illumination. It fills the space, evenly. Of course, if you have one light bulb and it's a 10,000 square foot space, you don't have much effects. But let's say in a normal room, and we can see this when they early started to install electricity, they had a general diffuse lights right in the middle of the room that was like a mini sun, and it was lighting up all the room. So basically, that's where it started. And like the some of the benefit is that it reduced contrast. It doesn't have mass contrast, minimize shadow. It create a certain visual comfort. And I mean, for what it is, for years it has been um, very useful in any installation. Now, let's look at everyday example. Where do we find general diffuse? First of all, when we have a cloudy day, a cloudy sky, that's what we have. We have like a uniform lighting. Suddenly, everything becomes the same. Like we see that. We have these frosted lamps. Like these big balls that used to be street lighting in form of a candle flame, or what that would diffuse a beautiful glow on the street and everywhere, and that would be or like I said, you have this in the middle of the ceiling, and then it creates, it lights up the room evenly. So those are everyday example. And then when we look at this in the architecture, as an example, in the kitchen, um, maybe that's what we want. We want to have some nice pendant that are glass blown, and that gives a nice light distribution around, so that it reveals space and show all the surrounding. We are in a you're going to see lights at all the space. I think it's custom made, or it's crystal, or the type of light you'll see most of the time, 90% of the time, is a very soft, glowing, general lighting. So general diffuse, I mean. So now, what does that give us? What kind of emotional quality that gives us? Well, of course, again, that's why I was saying that's what we need to talk about before we talk about fixtures. The fact that some of the emotional quality are that general lighting is very calming because you see everything. There's no secret, there's nothing. When you start dimming it, it becomes very calming. It's very relaxed. You don't feel too stressed. You don't feel hard edge. You don't feel nothing. It feels safe too because everything is lit. All the different corners you see up, down. You see around the window. It gives you that safe impression, and also it's quiet, and quiet meaning you don't have nothing that comes out architecturally, so you don't have like big shadow or arch or anything like that. So again, general diffuse lighting is the base, and funny enough, once you understand that, it's now you see where general diffuse lights is, and you're going to understand that, yeah, it's true, like it has this feeling, this filling space, and rather than pointing at an object or having a spot on the floor or an arch on the wall. So it gives you a very focus, you know like you don't have any attention on the space. And this there's no, I mean, this type of vocabulary happens because you know what you want. And already, if you start talking about general diffuse lighting, you kind of have in your head a good idea of what kind of fixture is going to give you that, right? So you have a fixture that's going to light up everywhere. So now you can see, and we'll see that tomorrow when we talk about the different, the different, the different fixtures. Now we're going to see that a fixture can have both effect. A pendant can be directional, or a pendant could be general diffuse. And depending on what behavior you want, you'll choose a certain fixture compared to the others. But if we look at the premise, we know now that the difference between a diffuse and we'll see directional soon, then we know that this is the primary layers that we want to find out where these zones are. And then after that, we come in with the fixtures. So let's talk about the second part, which is the directional fixtures, or direct lights, or spot, or. But what it means is that we have the light um, that is going in one direction. It's a very focused beam that's going in one direction. And it's very strong, like boom, boom. Like we have these arches, very, very strong, a rhythm. So all of that makes it very sharp shadow, and it defines an illumination. When you have a series of recess, you see a rhythm, you see a pattern. There's no, when you look around, you see that and you don't see anything else. So and as example, I was telling you that an overcast cloud will give you general. When we have the sunlight coming through a window, now we have directional lighting. This is what it is. It's very, very, very direct. A flashlight. And for those of you that like theater, well, in theater, that's 90% of the lighting is directional. Why? Because we want to keep your attention focused on certain thing while other things are happening at the same time, but maybe technical. We may have a costume change. We may have a set. We may have accessory changing. So by how we gain time is that we're going to keep your attention focused in one direction while something else is happening in the others. And direct light is very defining as far as shape. And you'll see that because we'll see sometimes we have what we call different accessory, and you'll see some leaf on the wall, and you see them, they're cut out beautifully and perfectly. So very, very defined. You're going to have some very defined arches on the wall. You're going to have some very defined circle in a corridor of a hotel, or in your house. You're going to have some very defined lighting directional directly on your artwork or on your sculpture. And then we'll talk about composition and design later, but right now I just want to keep your attention on general, diffuse, and directional. Now, and you'll see by the end of this episode that you can walk into any space and start describing the emotional feeling that you're going to have or that is there and why you're feeling that way. So, like I said, we want to create drama. You know, like we have a light on a sculpture and everything else is black. This sculpture is alive. It comes and it talks to you. The only all your attention's going there. You go to the opera, everything's on the. I mean, you have a grandiose decor, but when the scene gets to the the, the I wouldn't say not the epiphany, but the major crescendo, you only see the singer. That's it. You went from that big to a little focused area. So it's very, very dramatic. Now she's all alone in this world on this planet, and she's singing, or you know. So again, it will help us define shapes, create contrast because you have these scallops, and on the other walls you have nothing. Also highlight objects, art wall, sculpture, I mean, name it. And then we also have the drama, meaning that, you know, if we have, let's say, a blue background and we have a white, it's very, very dramatic. And if we have everything red and we have some white, or we have everything green and we have some yellow, or whatever complementary color or not, it will emphasize the drama. So direct lighting is the opposite of the general diffuse. Instead of filling up the room, it will make it a point somewhere. And the most important thing about direct lighting is that it creates attention on something. So it's the beginning of the visual hierarchy. You walk into a headquarters, you see the light on the logo, and then you see that the reception is well lit, and the rest, you'll naturally walk to that area because the attention is needed and wanted over there. So now let's talk about these two elements together. How we use them to create a story. How we use directional lighting and general diffuse to create the mood. How to create to reveal a space. And it doesn't matter if you are outside or inside. And it doesn't matter if you're a big project or a small project. It doesn't matter if you have one source or if you have 1,000 sources. the difference and the composition of both, the play with the boat, will tell you two separate message. And the beauty and the experience and the knowledge is when you know how to play with them and integrate them into the architecture so that you have this beautiful storyline, and it takes you and it brings you into that story that you want to reveal or you want to tell. So you start the space with a layer of general lighting, and maybe there's some area where you don't want to. And then in these area, you may want to have some directional on some mural or some fresco or some sculpture. So just imagine you walk into this beautiful, well-lit space, and then you come into this middle of that space, and then you have this directional lighting coming up or going up down, and then you keep walking, and then you go back into a general lighting space. So just by telling you that little story, now you see that you had a path and you had an experience, and we didn't never talked about product, we never talked about wattage, we never talked about color, we never talked about anything. So just knowing these two nuances helps you to describe probably any story that is possible. So you will have a beautiful and uniform environment. Now, and we'll talk about this on design, but let me just tell you a little more detail of the story. And then you will also understand how lighting control, and then also color, and fixtures and different things. So you're walking into this space, and as you're walking in, the general lighting, the general diffuse is dim, and then you have accent directional lighting on the receptionist, and then she tells you to go and follow the path, and then a series of directional lighting in a very dark environment guides you to a different kind of artifact. And then while you're there, you have all your attention on it, you're looking at them, and they're very well defined. And as you're walking through, then you have this beautiful general lighting, again, that it's a very pale color, and then you have some directional that are going up and is creating these lights beam circle on the ceiling, and then suddenly you are in a different place, and then the story continue. So right now, again, I just told you a very dramatic aspect of the same story without, again, using fixtures or any. I use a little bit of colors and beam and this and that, but you understand. So now we're not limited into the hardware. And you're going to say, well, but Bob, what I do works. Good. I know. What I do works too. Now, you have the perfect story in your head, and you put it on paper, and you tell your clients, and then the client walks in and he's like, well, this is not what you told me. And that happens all the time, all the time. Why? Because you didn't agree and you didn't understand how to deliver what you promised, or you didn't make sure that what you told the client was what he understood. And this way, when you talk about direct, indirect, 5-minute demo before we start the talk, they understand everything. They understand that they're going to have directional on their art. They understand that in the kitchen, they're going to have several layers. They're going to have a directional layers. They're going to have a layers of directional under the counter and indirect over the counter. They're going to have some directional on the kick space. They're going to have some general diffuse above the island that's going to give them some lighting. Then they're going to have maybe some recessed directional that are lighting up to add some more light because they're cutting stuff and they're cooking stuff. So right there, you went from a technical vocabulary that was very, very technical to something that they understand in a minute, and they can feel, and also they will also understand that the hardware then will justify the means, and their choice of having a specific brand as because they like the model and this and that, the first question you're going to ask is that what type of lighting does it do? Is this a general diffuse or this is a directional? And then from there, the conversation will change because you'll see by themselves, they'll say, well, I really, really like them. And I know they're just creating a little bit of general diffuse. So maybe we can enhance it with some directional on the wall or indirect from the floor to the ceiling that will bounce back, or some nice wall counts that are direct, indirect. Wow. So, and we'll see the fixtures tomorrow and how the dialogue goes with them. But again, we haven't talked about anything, any hardware. We just talk about lighting feelings and lighting perception. And this is, if I do this today, I'll feel that I am very, I got my point. And also I'll feel that I I share my passion and Abe Fader's passion about revealing the space. You know, that diffuse light reveals space. And direct light, you know, line creates line that will stick, will create and define the space in a very dramatic way, and so forth. So now let's talk about, and I hope this is clear. And the beauty of this is that you can write me, you can call me. I mean, and I'm very easy to. So let's talk about the industry a little bit, even though this is my Friday topic. But the industry is somehow confused about the sources, because of the LED make everything bright. Suddenly they forgot about what the meaning of light is and what the emotion are part of, and 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 focusing on catalog um, doesn't help us. When you focus on fixtures and catalog, that doesn't do anything for us, and that doesn't help you bringing to your client 24 different catalogs, or in a presentation to a board talking about the performance and this and that. It doesn't help. What they want to know is that how is it going to be, what kind of feeling, and what's the outcome. Now when we talk about engineering, that's a different story, because now we're talking about illumination level, and this too is very important, because the engineers that are doing the lighting calculation, they need to know exactly the amount of light that's going to hit the surface, and depending, no matter what surface, they need to know, and that will help. So one series of fixtures may be not enough, but when you turn all the layers together, your lighting level is perfect. So again, if you can have this dialogue with your electrical engineers, then you'll have amazing result. Designer, well, it's very simple. Most designer are, and that's their job, and it's perfect, is that they really focus, interior designer, they really focus on the aesthetic. And the aesthetic, like I said a couple minutes ago, can play tricks on you, but it can also help you. I always tell the interior designers, no matter what size project I'm working on, tell me what your design idea is. And then I have an idea of what I have to do to complement or to deliver what I promise in my scope. And that way, there's no surprise from the client, there's no surprise from the designers, there's no battle on the FF&E, because everybody knows what they have to do. And I know what my electrician's going to install. I know what the designer's going to provide. I know what the custom fixtures are going to be. And sometimes I will design fixtures that are complements to both, to the engineering and to the design element. So that way we can bring the lighting level higher without having to compromise or having ceiling acne. Ceiling acne, can we say that in English? Well, when there's too much holes and so forth. So the whole idea is that we take, sometimes you want it to be nice and generally diffuse, but sometimes you want to create some drama within. So again, by mixing both, it works. And that comes back to my conversation I had about the layers. When when you manage several projects at the same times, one of the downfall is that um, the vocabulary and the design intent get diluted, and sometimes they get lost. And this is not because there's bad intention. This is not because there's ignorance. This is not. It's just the speed that the particles are flowing are very fast. And if you don't have a checklist and everybody works on the same checklist, it becomes very hard for the firm to keep their integrity. So again, it's not bad intention. It's just life. Life happens. We have a rush presentation, or we have to do this and we have to do that, and that person got sick, or this person that was supposed to provide that didn't do it. I mean, life is happening, and God knows that today, in today's economy and today's world, it's happening a little bit more, and it's more obvious when you have that pressure on you. So when you're doing hospitality, or you're doing residential, or you're doing museum, or anywhere where you have high level and high standard, it shows. And unfortunately, like the light behavior is not something that we can do at the end. It's not something that you can add on. It's not something that, well, we can just add a couple things and it's going to change it. It doesn't. Because if you didn't think about it from the beginning and you didn't express it, it will never happen. Some case it will be uh, wash out, because sometimes project managers and companies, I mean, they switch in between. You have different management, you have different ownership, you have different executive, but you'll know, and your firm will know when you look at this project, what was the design intent and what is the delivery is two different things. And then, and I didn't even talk about, and that's my conversation for Friday, about the industry, because we also know that sometimes we're short in people, we're short in time, we're short. We'll have the local distributor or lighting agency to do our layout, and of course, if we, even them, they could do what we want if we communicate clearly that the design intent and the emotional we want to go. So I think I think we start to understand that it is not a lot of work, and it's not a lot of it's not technical at all. It's just the way we're going to shape the story with general diffuse and directional line that are going to tell us where the rest of the story going to end up and what the end result will be. So let's say your project feels flat. Well, you know that maybe you forgot some directional somewhere, right? Let's say the the design team change in between. Well, you go through the notes and all you see is a bunch of catalog cuts, and you have no ideas what was the design intent. And for you, arriving on this project at a later date and at a later time will be, it's impossible that you can deliver what was promised to the client. So again, and I think the one way that we do this, and a good way to do that, is to do an audit, you know, before you start thinking about implementing a design philosophy, and have a true open heart and look at the different projects you did and what was the design intent and what was delivered to the client, and honestly have a conversation and take some notes and say, okay, well, you know, our weakness is there, our strength is there, and that way what's going to happen is that you'll be you'll be able to address exactly what are the thing to optimize and what are the things that you need to drop because they're useless. So yeah, so for me it became a game changer. And also, like I told you, I designed a lot of custom lights, and and that's what one thing that helped me into designing fixtures. It was knowing exactly what I needed. Do I need a directional effect? Do I need a general diffuse effect? That's it, two things. So pretty powerful stuff. So today we explore the behavior of light. Tomorrow we'll start examining how does that translate into fixtures. How do we take general diffuse and directional, and how do we bring this into fixtures, and how do we start creating the narrative so that we can deliver what we promise, and also make everybody in the room and in the design team agree on our design intent. So on that, I would just say thank you for have been there today. um, I hope it helps you to give a little bit of mental clarity, um, because there's there's a lot of stuff we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about diffuser, we're going to talk about optics, beam angle, layering, accent, lighting, and so forth. But it all begins with direct lighting and general diffuse. So once we understand that, then there's no limit. So thank you, and looking